Hello, everyone. This is Jimmy Hitchcock on the Jimmy Hitchcock podcast called Post P.O.A.S.T TRT, the real truth. I have a plan, and you know the reason why I came up with this plan or wanted to put forth a plan is because I'm tired of the whining. Like I'm sick. I'm sick of the whining. I'm sick of people just crashing out over Donald Trump, and every time there's an election, we just crash out, talk about what they do and don't do for African Americans. But today I put up, oddly enough, I put up a thing about DEI, and the actual data has come out about DEI and who benefits most. And just like affirmative action, the white woman benefits the most. And always, all at all times, anytime that the policies come down that you think that it's really focused on African Americans, that's not the case. It's simply not the case. It's never the case. If you start to believe this mess that the Democrats or Republicans are for you, if you're African Americans, you're pretty stupid. You're actually living in la la land because none of it's designed for you. It's designed to subjugate you, and that's the facts. If you don't believe it, just look at the DI numbers, the data, statistics. First is the white woman that it benefits the most. It goes on the racial side, it goes first, the Latino American, second, the Asian American, third, the Indian American, and fourth, the Native American. And guess who comes in last on the DEI? Benefiting from DEI. Guess who comes in last? African Americans, like you would suspect, just like affirmative action. All these policies that you really believe that really focuses on you actually doesn't. And we argue about it and cry about it when it's dismantled. Well, the policy really didn't give any type of effect. The only effect that those policies have is backlash because the general public don't know the difference between propaganda and real information. So they believe the propaganda that you're actually benefiting from something that you actually do not benefit from. And the policies are not for you, they're actually for others. The LGBTQ community benefited more than Black people. Think about that for a second. So if you believe that the DEI policy is for you, the numbers and statistics don't say that. It actually says you're last in the thought process. Right? So I wish people stop whining over it. And I'm tired of people whining and crying over these policies that they think affect them. They don't affect you. You have to just come to the realization and understand that this is just the facts. Coming out of slavery, there could have been policies that really benefited Black people. Coming out of slavery, we could have had several instances in which we could have made upward mobility in this society, but time after time after time after time, there was a plan to make sure it didn't happen. And that plan was coordinated, constructed, completely thought out, executed, and implemented. If you don't believe that, don't just follow history. And just like the Trump people always say, do your research. Do your research. But I believe, oddly enough, I believe that in our efforts to make things better, that I believe that the Trump supporters are allies to us getting our stuff together. Why? Because I'm 100% sure that they are tired of hearing you cry and whine and talk about these things on the internet. Like everybody's pretty much tired. Like I'm tired. I'm sick of it. I'm like completely sick of it. I'm tired of the marching. I'm tired of all of the putting up the fists. I'm tired. I'm tired of it all. We must come up with a plan of action and stop marching. The first plan that you should come up with, or the first thoughts that you should have, is that you should put a plan together that's economically impactful. If you're not going to have a plan that's economically impactful, there's no plan. You're not going to do anything. This is one of the reasons. This is the biggest problem I have with the Nation of Islam. As much as they talk, they don't have an economic plan whatsoever. They've been around for 100 years, seems like, and they have no economic plan to present to Black America. So, and we have some people that's presented plans, but you don't give them the time of day because they're in books. And sometimes we just don't read, or we don't step beyond the book and talk about the actual plan. We don't even try to put any effort into seeing or doing or creating or constructing. What we do is sit back and complain, and we talk about each other. Oh, he can't do this and he can't do that. Oh, he have this on his record, and he can't lead. He can't. Why is he doing it? Instead of us actually trying to come together, we do everything we can to be apart or separate. Now, Chancellor Williams said it will take 1,000 years, 1,000 years for us to get rid of the self-hatred heaped on us by this system. 1,000 years. Is that going to be the case? It looks like it. It looks like we're on the 1,000-year path that he's talking about. It looks like it. Are we on that 1,000-year path? He said that in 1972. 1972. He said that 1972. Almost 53 years ago. Headed down that path. And he has a plan in the back of his book. And that's the inspiration that made me come with a modern day plan. It's not similar because those are different time frames. We're in 2025 here, 1972 and 2025, big time differences in technology. And technology is going to play a big role in what we do as a community. Now, how do we come together? How do we come together as a community? We got to put aside differences. Even although I was not for Kamala. I would have never voted for Kamala. She's a terrible candidate. And the whole situation that the Democrats put up a whole charade about Biden and things like that. It was just so disgusting. It just checked me out of politics. So what I do now is I play the center and I just call balls and strikes. I don't care about this political system as it pertains to being emotionally involved. Being emotionally involved in this political system is a terrible bet. It's a terrible way to proceed. If you don't have the ability to take feelings or your emotion out of politics, it's gonna hurt you every time. There will always be a situation where they remind you that this is their country. This is their country. Yeah. Talking about we're the gods of the planet and gods of the universe and gods of the earth and things like that. No, they are. They are the gods of this earth. Why? Because they can come in your community that's been decrepit, bad, full of crime, and they call it gentrification, and they turn it into a beautiful place. Got a place in Charlotte. Just talking about the projects where they're shootings every day, murders. They come into that neighborhood and change it and turn it into a multi-million-dollar situation where there's condos, apartments, and multi-million-dollar property. That's what they can do to your. And we're talking about a community that was Black forever, from the start until they took it over. That's the power of them. What can we do? What is it that we can do? We have power and we have economic power, but we don't have anything if we're not together. You got nothing. You got zero. But I'm going to go on with my plan. But the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to present why we're in this situation that we're in. Our community has been ravaged. It's been just completely decimated by policy after policy, regardless of the people in the White House or the people in Congress, regardless. In fact, the Democrats put the most diabolical policies on you, African American. The most diabolical of all the policies came from the Democrats, through and through. The only real one that you can say that the Republicans put on the African American community was one thing, and that was the crack law, the crack cocaine law. Okay. But then Bill Clinton came in and turned it over and made it even worse with the 95 crime bill. So I'm going to present this plan, right? And it's a plan of just, it's an economic plan. I mean, I'm not saying that this is what's going to change or help the Black community in any way. I'm not saying that. I'm just starting the conversation, and the conversation needs to be had. Why can't we clean up our own communities? Why can't we do the things that it takes to make a better community or a better world for the African American? We have the ability to do it. We just don't do it. We have the technology. We have the platforms. We can meet on these platforms. We can send money through these platforms. We can Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. It's so many ways to receive money. And if you don't trust me, right, I'll have a system of checks and balances anyway in my organization. But if you don't trust me, you can put nine people that you have to go through a checklist with to extract any money. And we can show every single day where the money is going. Every single day you can have an audit, right? Because we have the technology to do it. There's no excuses. We have no excuses. But what we do all the time is waddle in the muck and the mire of our past. And once I present this presentation of my plan, this is the second part. The first part, I just talked a little, but this is the second part of this series of a plan of action to stop talking. All right. We don't want to talk anymore. We talk too much. We talk too much. Put a plan of action together and do something about it. It's time to stop talking. It's time to start doing. Okay, so Black communities enduring struggle. It's been a struggle since the time we've gotten here, right? But we didn't come here without a history. Of course, there's history behind us. Did you know that the Wall of Benin was the biggest structure ever created? Right? We think it's the pyramids, but it's the Wall of Benin, and that was 1,500 years of man labor. Right? And that was Nigeria. Nigeria is a new name. Nigeria used to be Benin. Right? So we have a history that we don't know because it's been taken away from us. You know, I'll stop there, but I'm sick and tired of the complaining without action. You can complain all you want if you have some plan of action. You can complain because you're trying to set up something that's better. But when you complain and you just talk about all the stuff that Trump or whoever is doing, you don't ever talk when the Democrats are in, but they put forth the worst policies. You never talk about them. They put forth the work. You just think they're doing something for you, right? But I'm glad that data came out for DEI that showed that that's not the case. That's not the case. So we'll go through this plan. I'm gonna go through this history quickly. You know the history, but I'm gonna go through this history quickly because it's very important that we get through this history and we got to put it behind us. We got to put it behind us. There's a lot to put behind us. I agree. Hell, there's so much in this history. I'm just going through the outskirts of it to show why there's a 20-to-1 wealth gap in America between the Caucasians and the African American. I'm just going to present to you why that gap exists. The gap exists because they want it to exist. And it's been a plan so much that now you want it to exist. It's been such a great diabolical plan that you want it to exist. You don't want to change it. Okay, so I'll start into the presentation. I went on a little bit too long, but here we go.
Themselves as a distinctively African civilization. Of the numerous hairstyles donned by the men of Kemet, the most popular by far was the short twist. Egyptologists, for obvious reasons, have often speculated that this hairstyle was a wig emulating Kushite hair, but this has never been substantiated by any evidence. In reality, it is well known that this is a popular hairstyle that permeated continental Africa. Bronze artworks from Benin illustrate the commonality of the short twist being worn in similar concentric rows on various depictions. A variation of this style can be found amongst the Afar men of Ethiopia, where the twists are also substantially lengthened. This style is also reflected in Kemetic artwork, but by far the most notable example of this style was captured contemporaneously by Roman artists in exquisite bronze busts, portraying the distinctly African appearance of the ancient Egyptians.
So a quick depiction of Roman art that depicted the Egyptians as black. But that's a Roman art, right? And one thing that I would suggest is that you go back or you go and subscribe to King's Monologue, because King's Monologue is a superb channel, has incredible information. All right, he's one of the better ones out there, I believe. And right now he's doing a PhD, so he's not doing much material, not doing much content. But the past content you can go through some of his shorts fairly quickly. But he's able to decipher also. He's able to decipher Metu Neter, and he's able to go through the Metu Neter and teach you how to decipher Metu Neter, right? So it's pretty good channel. I would advise everybody to look at it, but this is just showing that we didn't just come here and like we weren't just slaves. Right? We had a different history, and that's part of a Black history. But I'm going to talk to you about how later on, probably in Black History Month, of how the first place or the first people that came here in America were Moors. Not only did the Moors come here, all right, just an aside right now. It's kind of ironic that there's a religion out here, and their religion says that there were some Israelites that came here long before Columbus, right? That some Israelites came here long before Columbus, and they set up colony here, and was, and became, part of the population. And that and that religion is called Mormon. The Mormon religion. No, it's the Latter-day Saints now, but it used to be called the Mormon religion. The Moors. They named it after the Moors, right? And of course, the Moors are Black. They definitely were Black. It's kind of a debate. I don't think it's a debate anymore because so much of the history just is so prevalent now that you can't really deny it. I'm gonna talk about how in Black History Month next month, I'm gonna talk about how the Moors were the first of the slaves that they captured, because the Moors were right there in Europe when the Pope deemed it so that it's okay to have slaves. Once the Vatican said, okay, yes, it's time to have some slaves, they captured the Moors right there in Europe and brought them over first. And then they went to Egypt and captured some of those and took them as well. And then the West African slave trade came about, right? So most of the people that's in America, most of the Black Americans are descendants of Moors. Yes, because one, they were here first, already mating with the population, but they came even before that, way beyond that, and they were Moors then, but it was called a different name. It was beyond that. That's why they have the heads down there, the Olmec heads, where the guy has basically a high top fade on the Olmec head. Okay, so that's a little bit of history before slavery. And we can talk about that later, but this is just the portion of what I'm saying in regards to we had a history before coming over here, and we had a history before slavery. Going to the next video.
Transatlantic slave trade, which began as early as the 15th century, introduced a system of slavery that was commercialized, racialized, and inherited. Enslaved people were seen not as people at all, but as commodities to be bought, sold, and exploited. Though people of African descent, free and enslaved, were present in North America as early as the 1500s, the sale of the 20 and odd African people set the course for what would become slavery in the United States.
Slavery in America was a brutal institution that lasted for over 2 centuries, shaping the nation's social and economic fabric. It began in 1619 when the first African slaves were brought to Virginia to work on tobacco plantations. Over time, slavery expanded, particularly in the South, where enslaved people were forced to labor on cotton, sugar, and rice plantations. They endured inhumane treatment, including physical abuse, separation from families, and denial of basic rights. Resistance took many forms, from rebellions like Nat Turner's to everyday acts of defiance. The abolitionist movement gained momentum in the 19th century, challenging the moral and political foundations of slavery. The Civil War, 1861 to 1865, ultimately led to slavery's end with the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment in 1865. However, the legacy of slavery persisted through systemic racism and discrimination, shaping the struggle for civil rights in subsequent decades.
The American Civil War ends. The U.S. government enters Reconstruction with 3 amendments to the Constitution. Slavery is abolished, and former slaves are granted citizenship and the right to vote. At the state and local level, white Southern Democrats implement laws to suppress the political and economic gains made by African Americans. Under the Separate but Equal Clause, the U.S. Supreme Court legitimizes segregation and social discrimination, treating black people as second-class citizens. Known collectively as Jim Crow laws, after a racial depiction performed in blackface, these laws reinforce racial prejudice and deny rights to black people in the United States. Federal legislation brings the Jim Crow era to an end, yet its long shadow still looms large over the struggle for equality.
So that's another depiction of Jim Crow. So we come out of slavery. We get emancipated. I think 1865, and well, we're industrious people. We're the only ones who know how to work. So we start creating great towns and start to have really nice neighborhoods and things like that, businesses, etc. Some of our leaders become politicians and they get into the political system, especially in South Carolina, where we had like the most ever in the history of this country. And we're thriving. But here comes a movie comes along. A movie comes along called Birth of a Nation. And Birth of a Nation depicts African American males, as they do always, as males that was just so out of control and just running around raping white women and just stealing watermelon out of the a patch and watermelon patch, craziness on this film. And that film had this man don a hood, and that white hood, right? That white hood, that white sack that he put over his head with the eyes cut out was the Ku Klux Klan. And the Ku Klux Klan had already been formed, right, by General Forrest. And General Forrest, after forming the Ku Klux Klan, right after the Civil War, the war was still kind of going on when he formed it, and he did some horrific murders within his own regiment, right? So we come out of slavery and we thrive and we're doing our thing as far as farming, as far as building businesses, because we're industrious. We're the only ones who really worked, except the working class white man who didn't have slaves. And they were on kind of the same level, but of course, he has a better status in society because he's white. But that film, Birth of a Nation, really is the propaganda that launches the Ku Klux Klan. Who created that propaganda? I always wonder, where did the propaganda come from? Because today, you think you're so much more sophisticated than they were back then. But you fall for propaganda all the time, especially on social media. And during that time, the newspaper came about, and that was their social media. That's their social media. So can you not blame the white Americans that's looking at this propaganda and they're depicting us in a way that we're taking over the world. We're taking over the United States. We're doing more than they're depicting. They're depicting white women being raped by ex-slaves. So, as a white man who's uneducated, because nobody could hardly read back then, so they're just looking at images. So, as a white male or anyone during that time that felt that they were higher or more prominent than the African American, and then they see that the African American is making these specific gains, as people, do today, they start to believe that there's a takeover coming. It was propaganda. And who created the propaganda and why? Something we'll touch on in Black History Month. All right. But I'm going to continue on. So we come out of slavery. There's the Jim Crow law staring us in the face. And here's World War I and then World War II. All right. The soldiers come home. When they come home, it's almost 16 million that return. I don't know how many went out, but 16 million returned. Of that 16 million, 1.8 or 1.9 of them were African American. And they create this GI Bill. And the GI Bill is probably the most instrumental of the policies that helped the white American gain a foothold on society and gain a foothold on that wealth gap. It helped them gain a foothold on that wealth gap. Okay, because the reason why is because they bought those homes. It was just a suburban boom because there was a boom of babies being born and it was not enough housing. So the government came in with contractors and the government gave subsidies to these contractors to build out suburban America, to take them out of the inner city where the Black people were. So they created a whole different path, a whole different mechanism for success outside of the city, so they can move the inner city white people out to the suburbs, and they built out this incredible housing situation, right? But the GI Bill actually allowed them to get loans for those homes in the suburbs, and it allowed them to get an education, which is denied to the African American. Similarly, there was a Farm Act that gave millions of land to white farmers. Then they built a school to educate these white farmers, schools all over to educate these white farmers. Then they gave them subsidies to farm, to create these farms, to mechanize the farms. Then, once it became industrial and it became a big manufacturing situation where it was big farm, they gave them money not to farm. Now, just like Martin Luther King said, he says, and they're asking Black people to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. But they're getting welfare like it's no tomorrow. They're getting subsidies like it's no tomorrow. So this is the situation. Okay. And I went on a little bit too long, but I wanted to make sure that you understood it. All right. So I'm going to play the video.
1944, at the height of World War II, the United States made a major investment in the nation's social safety net, aimed at boosting education and promoting upward mobility. Commonly known as the GI Bill of Rights, the program sought to integrate 16 million veterans returning from World War II back into civilian life. But like many of the governmental systems put in place During the Jim Crow era, the GI Bill, in practice, systematically excluded most African Americans.
The GI Bill provides returning soldiers and veterans a range of benefits, including mortgages to purchase homes, job training, loans to go to school, and this really was instrumental in creating the new American middle class.
The GI Bill had the potential to put the American people on a level playing field, but Black soldiers who came back, who were prepared and anxious to get higher education and buy homes, were not able to ascend into the middle class the same way that whites were.
When the GI Bill was being drafted and debated in Congress, Representative John Rankin of Mississippi played an enormous role as chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. An unabashed racist and an unapologetic defender of Jim Crow, Rankin persuaded his fellow lawmakers to make the implementation of the bill the responsibility of the individual states.
States and localities that had long histories of discriminating against African Americans were in some respects given carte blanche to close blacks out of things like college education and home ownership, great wealth generating mechanisms in the American experience.
While Black people went to colleges at numbers larger than they had in previous times, they have never been able to get into colleges at the same rates as people who were white. The other thing is banks were discriminating in terms of loans. We didn't have access to houses at the point when you could really get in and accumulate wealth.
So if we wonder why blacks aren't part of serious wealth holders in this society, why there's a 13, 14, 15, maybe even 20 to 1 gap in wealth holdings, that's a piece of it.
We really did have a moment in the history of the country where we could have closed the gap and made up for all the legacy and burden of slavery and Jim Crow and discrimination that had happened. Things like the GI Bill really had the potential to improve the quality of life and the future for African Americans. But discrimination and racism intervened.
One of the biggest things that frustrate me about that video is the woman saying, we really could have closed the wealth gap, or we could have made things right after the wars, and we could have made policy that could have helped with African American wealth and build a great African American middle class. She's saying we. Who is we? No, it's not a we, it's a they. It's a they could have. They could have, because they were in control. The people that are in control could have, but they chose not to. Why? I'm starting to believe, I'm starting to have these feelings that it's something else. It has to be something else besides just straight up wanting to subjugate you because you're black or because of your race or what. I'm starting to think that there's something else. Is a reason that they want to subjugate you. It's a reason. It's not other than just this, other than that. But we'll talk about it later. We'll have a complete discussion about that situation. I'm going to go live one day on Facebook and we're going to have that conversation, because I think we should explore it. There was so much propaganda that was just being put out, and who's responsible for the propaganda? Why is the propaganda being spread? Why did you want to pit the lower class of white against the lower class of black? And that's eventually the fight that came about. Wasn't no rich people. Yeah, maybe they were telling, directing people what to do, but was no rich people really going after and hanging black people from trees, right? So it had to be something else. It had to be a plan to pit one against the other. So it's kind of a thing that I like to ask. It's like a conversation that I think we should have one day. We should have that conversation. But the GI Bill of Rights, the denial of the GI Bill of Rights, to me was the one policy, yes, that could have gotten a bunch of black people into the middle class, because 1.6 to 1.8 million soldiers came back from war, and they were, just like some of the poor, because a lot of the military was like working class, poor, but they put and pushed that population, the white population, into the middle class and pushed you into the lower class. And the biggest policy that did it, in conjunction with the GI Bill denial, in conjunction with that, is the redlining policy. All Democrat policies, by the way, all Democrat policies, all Democrat policies, and every one of the people that were advocating for the redlining and for the GI Bill of Rights to go to the states were Democrats. That's right. But you don't let the Republicans off the hook, because most of the Republicans were Northerners, right? And when you sent the GI Bill to the North, they got denied more. Actually, they got denied more than the people in the South got denied. Think about that for a second. So you have your people in the North that's supposed to be anti-slavery. So when the GI Bill of Rights comes about, they deny the GI Bill of Rights for the housing portion and the loan portion and the education portion. They deny it more than the South did. Food for thought.
In every way imaginable, the consequences of redlining to many Black and Brown communities across America meant that those communities had the least and the last of everything. So I want to talk about redlining, because this is a term you may have heard, but most people don't actually know the history. In 1933, in the midst of America's Great Depression, when unemployment rates were 25% and millions of people were not only out of work, but many of them were houseless, the federal government, under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, established an agency called the Home Owners Loan Corporation. Basically, it tried to make home buying much more affordable by subsidizing the cost of building and lending, such that people would be able to afford to buy for the first time. Millions of Americans participated, except that when the Home Owners Loan Corporation began to issue mortgages, it came up with a scheme to decide which communities were deserving of loans and which ones weren't. They made maps and used a color-coded scheme. Green meant this was a community that you could lend to, and red meant you could not. The basic decision they made was to determine that any community with the presence of Black people or brown people or people who perhaps spoke Italian in certain parts of the country could not receive support from the Home Owners Loan Corporation. This created a system that came to be known as redlining, because communities that were deemed risky by the mere presence of people of color, most especially Black people, were disqualified from getting direct support from the federal government to purchase homes. This policy lasted until 1968, when the federal government passed the Fair Housing Act, which made all forms of discrimination in the buying and selling or renting of homes illegal. But the truth is that the legacies of redlining from that moment to the present meant that Black people were subjected to other forms of exploitative lending. A system called contract buying grew up as a way to sell Black people homes on a layaway plan. You made set payments over an extended period of time, but you never owned the home until the very last payment. It was very common for unscrupulous sellers to withhold that final payment in an effort to take back the home from a person who had worked incredibly hard to buy it. Home ownership has been the most important asset that a typical white family has in order to do simple things like borrow money to send a child to college. But most importantly, they have financial freedom. But for communities that have been subjected to redlining, they didn't have those advantages. Not only that, the very communities that they lived in suffered from divestment, including the lack of grocery stores, the lack of businesses, the imposition of federal highways that often bisected their communities. In every way imaginable, the consequences of redlining to many Black and brown communities across America meant that those communities had the least and the last of everything. And to this day, the median wages and income of those communities and the financial insecurity that people who live in redline communities face has long-term health consequences for families, has educational consequences for young people whose schools often don't have the tax basis to give them the same resources that communities that were never redlined actually have.
He kind of hinted to it a little bit too. The Urban Renewal Project, where pretty much they took all the highways straight through the best Black neighborhoods in America. One of them was Durham, Highway 147. They took it straight through the Black community, right? Why would they do that to Durham? What was so special about Durham? They had a company up there called North Carolina Mutual that created multimillionaires. Merrick, I'm drawing a blank right now, but John Merrick, I think of him later. It's the CTE. But there were, listen to this. Listen closely to what I'm about to say. There were hundreds of Black-owned businesses in Durham, North Carolina. Listen to it closely. Hundreds of Black-owned businesses in Durham, North Carolina. Durham, North Carolina was one of the great places in America for African Americans. Haiti, the Haiti community, named after Haiti because of the revolution. Haiti, the community of Haiti in Durham, North Carolina, was one of the most thriving, great African American communities in the country. What happened to it? It's something that happened to a lot of communities that were Black, but the most of the devastation came through two things: the Urban Renewal Project and heroin. Heroin was pumped into the communities of Durham in a big time way. Not many other communities in this state were targeted. Some in Charlotte, but Durham was targeted the most because of the thriving Black neighborhoods that they presented. Do your research. If you don't believe me, do your research. right? Black doctors, multiple black doctors, black hospital, black grocery stores. North Carolina Mutual was one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. It's still a North Carolina Mutual right around the corner from where I live. It's in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They still have it. Mechanic and Farmers Bank came out of Durham, North Carolina. We have one here in Winston-Salem, right around the corner from where I live. Right? Created by African Americans. In 1860 something was Mechanic and Farmers. 1916 or so, or 1915 or so, North Carolina Mutual came about. What happened? Yes, we got attacked. We've been attacked. Our community's been attacked, of course. The heroin came in and devastated that community, along with Highway 147 and all the other highways they ran through the black community in Durham, North Carolina. They called it the Urban Renewal Project. So, yeah, we have a lot of reasons to whine and complain. We got a lot of reasons, and people don't want to hear it today, because you've said racism so many times, and people, it's falling on deaf ears now. Like, you can't say it anymore. You can't talk about racism anymore because you talk about it too much. Instead of doing something about it, you talk too much. Yeah, that's what I said. You talk too much about racism. At some point in time, you're going to have to do something about it. And I'm not talking about taking up arms and doing something stupid like that, because that's not a fight that you can win. The only fight that you can win is to pull together, build something of your own, do something for yourself, do something for the community, understand what we're up against, and do it ourselves. Stop complaining. I'm tired of hearing it. Everybody putting these things up about Donald Trump and canceling DEI. Well, DEI wasn't for you anyway. Statistics say that the beneficiary of DEI was a white woman, just like affirmative action was same way. Why cry about it? Let it go. Who cares? But what you can do is create your own. Clean up the community on your own. Do for yourself. We're just as creative as anybody else, as smart as anybody else. Why is it that we have such a hard time understanding it? Anyway, so I just mentioned what they did to the community in Durham is what they continue to do today. And not only did they do it to Durham, they did it to a bunch of other communities. But after the Vietnam War, which is where that opium came from, after the Vietnam War, not even 11 years later, there was a CIA operation, and the Contras of Nicaragua needed some money to fight a war. And guess what? The CIA didn't get any funding for it, or didn't they wanted to have that war, but they didn't want it. I'm not sure if Reagan didn't want it or Congress didn't want it. I think Congress didn't pass it. But they went and had that war anyway. And that war, what came out of that was cocaine. And cocaine was being spread everywhere. But it wasn't being spread fast enough, and it wasn't giving them money fast enough. So what they did is they conducted chemical warfare on the black community. And they created this product that was being sold by a lot of black males in the community. Yeah, could they have turned it down? Yes, black males could have turned it down, but the economic situation during the Reagan administration, they made it so that it was so hard on the lower class blacks. It was incredible. It was a lot of poor, a lot of poverty. And I don't think that was like a mistake. I think it was like done purposely. Because when they created that crack, a lot of dudes started to come up and they could make, I mean, Freeway Rick Ross was making $3 million a day at one point in Florida. Them boys in my neighborhood, they was making big money too. And you talking about, they weren't making no $3 million a day, but they were making big money. But we all know this one. We all know this crack situation, right? So I'm not gonna play everything about the crack situation, but I'm gonna give you a little bit of a tidbit or a little point that I wanted to make about the crack situation. The Contras were flying it in to the United States, and they were flying it into a small state of Arkansas, and the Contras were dealing with the police force and the politicians in Arkansas, and they pretty much had those politicians bought. And a politician came out of there, and he was a governor, and he became your president. And when he became your president, soon after becoming a president, 3 years later, he created a crime bill to get reelected. A crime bill that he knew that the Contras was flying in, and the government had a hand in spreading that cocaine and that crack. That's y'all's guy.
This law, we will have 100,000 police officers on the street, a 20% increase. It will be used to build prisons to keep 100,000 violent criminals off the street. We will have the means by which we can say punishment will be more certain.
The whippings of mass distraction have always been in the play. People follow their sports teams more than they follow the things that's going to affect them every day. So a lot of times the bills are passed and politicians go back and forth, and all of a sudden you turn around and there's a crime bill that not only affects your present, but really seriously affects your future.
Clinton passed a crime bill which allowed now 14-year-olds to be tried as adults, more prisons being built.
The impact of the crime bill is devastating and felt almost immediately. For example, the 3 strikes law, this idea that if you have 3 offenses, that you're out of here, right? Like you go away. It increases your sentencing dramatically. That is embedded into the crime bill.
Violent crimes should be told. When you commit a 3rd violent crime, you will be put away and put away for good.
Sentencing discrepancies when it comes to drugs.
Cocaine versus crack.
Crack, cocaine.
Cocaine versus crack cocaine.
The penalty for possession of 5 grams of crack cocaine, the drug used and sold by many young blacks, is 5 years in prison. The penalty for possession of 5 grams of powdered cocaine, the drug favored by the white middle class, is probation.
And that's why so many people who got caught with very small amounts ended up doing really major time.
Do you think you'll be coming back here again?
That's hard to say.
These communities were asking for help. We know that they were like, we have problems. But what they were asking for was to get to the root of the problem. So that doesn't mean locking up a generation of African Americans, or labeling every Black man who walks out of his house a gangbanger.
So y'all can check that out on BBC. You know, you can check that out. It's a little trailer or whatever. But it just depicts the crime bill and situation. Go check it out. You know, I would say, just like I always say, do your research. Do your research. You'll find it. You'll find it. There's so much that we can point to. So we come out of slavery. There's the Jim Crow laws and a terrorist organization called the Ku Klux Klan. And they're going around hanging people from trees and doing all kinds of craziness, cutting off genitalia, doing things like that, right? Really putting serious trauma on the Black community. But we're resilient. Resilient we are. We go on building other communities, and we do a good job of it. But war comes along, 2 of them, World War I and II. And at the end of World War II, 16 million soldiers come home. Of that, 1.8 million are Black. They have a GI Bill of Rights that comes along, and that GI Bill of Rights push the white soldier and his families out to the suburbs, where they have this subsidy-driven economic house building policy that creates the suburbs for white folks. And they leave the Black people in the inner city. Then, to ensure that they stay in the Black city, they have the redlining, right? So have redlining come just in conjunction with the GI Bill denial. Not even 10, 11 years after the Vietnam War comes crack cocaine. But before that, during that Vietnam run, was a bunch of heroin that created some of the biggest drug dealers in our neighborhoods have ever seen. But crack comes along, and chemical warfare is on in our community, and we're the provider of the chemical by way of CIA. Black males. Crime bill comes along, sweep up hundreds of thousands of Black males. So this is the issue that I have with the attack. You know, we are called whiners, and we are called, you know, crybabies and things of that nature. And well, that's true. But if you just look at the evidence and you just go from decade to decade, what's happening is there's a systematic attack on the Black community. It's just bottom line. Systematic. Just like there's a systematic attack on Africa. Every time there's a leader that comes along in Africa, somehow, some way, that person dies in a violent death or assassinated and replaced with a puppet. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, we have same things happening that's happening on the soil of America is happening overseas. Patrice Lumumba, it's something that's going on that we don't know about. It's something that you don't know about yourselves that they know about you. Something they know about you that you don't know about yourself. And what could that be? I know what it is, and I'll tell you, but not today. I'm going to tell you during Black History Month. This is the final part of this part series. I don't know, it might be a 4-part series. Jimmy Hitchcock, P.O.A.S.T TRT. I'm out.